Okay, so like I said on Tuesday, from here on out, we're really, for the most part, just going to be reviewing stuff we've already talked about. So everything we're talking about today shouldn't really be new to us. It should just be a nice refresher. So you should be digging deep into your brain thinking, yeah, I remember talking about this a while ago. So hopefully this will be nice, easy, breezy. So we're going to start way at the very beginning. This is what we started talking about in August. Ugh, I can't even remember that far back. So we're going to start with the live science. And today we're first going to start with this thing that we've talked about all year. We know it, we love it, DNA. So this part we might not remember, but DNA is just short for this long fancy word, deoxyribonucleic acid. Whew. Really, we just need to know DNA. So DNA is what is going to hold an entire organism's, not just humans, any living thing, an entire organism's genetic material. So this is the information that makes that organism the way that it is. And this is what it looks like. Remember, it looks like that long ladder. If you took a ladder and twisted it, and it makes it look, I think, kind of like a macaroni and cheese noodle or spiral noodle, if you will. The steps of the ladder that make up the DNA, those are called those nitrogenous bases or the base pairs. You've got the A always pairing up with the T and the C always pairing up with the G. So they're very picky about who they pair up with, and they go across to make almost like the steps of the ladder. So this is your DNA. It's that long strand. Now, if we take that long strand of DNA and put it into small sections, those sections are your genes. So the genes are not the full strand, it's just small sections of that DNA.
My apologies. I couldn't.
And that DNA or the genes is what is going to determine what certain traits are, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. Okay, so we have that long strand of DNA, we have those small sections of genes. So how they are kept inside your body is that DNA is actually going to kind of tighten and shrivel up and form this structure that we call the chromosome. Okay, so those chromosomes, we often see them as an X shape. You have 23 pairs of them inside your body, or 46 total. So they are kept inside each cell. You might not see them represented as an X, you might see them just as a straight line, but usually they look like an X shape. All you really need to know is it's that big structure that is made up of that DNA and has the genes inside because it's made of DNA. Makes sense. So all of these chromosomes inside the cell are going to be found inside the nucleus of the cell, which is like the brain of the cell. So it's usually pictured as like a big circle within your body cells. Okay, so you have your DNA, it's that long strand, your genes are the small sections, and the chromosome is the big structure made up of that DNA and that genes. So let's move on. Before we move on a whole lot, at the end of each main section of review, I'm going to give you guys this thing. I'm just going to call it a cheat sheet. I can't think of a better name for it because you're not going to use it to cheat, obviously, but it's basically filled with tiny tricks and tips that's going to really help you to remember the main things you're going to need to know on the MAAP test. So here are a bunch of different ways you might see it pictured, because I'm sure you remember on like every benchmark, they give you a picture of a chromosome and DNA and genes, and they're asking you to label it or answer a question about it. So these are the thousands of different ways you might see it pictured. So here we've got the whole nucleus, and it's showing the chromosome kind of zoomed in. So they love to do that a lot. They'll show a picture zoomed in and make it nice and big. And you can see here that whole strand of DNA coming out of the chromosome because it's raveled up to form it. And then a small section is the gene. Same thing here. This one's pretty similar, but the chromosome, again, isn't shown as an X. It's just as a line. Here they've got, again, zooming in, showing the gene is a small section of the DNA, into a chromosome, into the nucleus, into an entire body. This one, these two I really want to talk about. These two are totally weird. So here we have a chromosome, not an X-shaped just a single line, but you see these small sections of it, small sections. So those are going to be your genes. And here you might see something like this where they show how the genes are the smallest and the DNA is the biggest, and they're both inside the biggest thing, which is the chromosome. Okay, also a few teeny tiny little tricks and phrases to help you remember, because I think especially the DNA and genes, it's easy to get those two mixed up. So one thing or phrase I want us to think about is you keep multiple pairs of genes, right, like your clothes genes, inside of your closet. So you typically, unless you're super rich, don't have multiple closets, right? You just have one closet. So think of closet as a chromosome. They both start with C. And inside the closet, you have multiple genes. So inside of your chromosomes, you have multiple genes. Maybe that helps you, maybe not. I don't know. I think it helps me. Adding on just a little bit to this. So each gene, I think I said this earlier, each gene is responsible for one specific trait. How it does that is your genes hold different instructions to create a specific protein. So you can think of your genes think of it like a recipe. So these are all going to be different recipes to make different proteins. So they all have different ingredients. So if you think of you're going to make a chocolate cake, if you change any of the ingredients, your chocolate cake isn't going to come out the same. Maybe it'll come out vanilla, or maybe it'll be gross and not even like a cake at all, right? So each gene has different ingredients, so the protein it makes is going to be different. So each gene is going to code for a specific, unique protein. Now, this is important because your proteins is what actually determines your traits or your characteristics. So one protein is in charge of creating maybe your hair texture or your height or your eye color, or like this picture shows here, your face shape. So your proteins are super important because they determine your traits, and they are made by genes. Now this part is super important because this seems to be something that we kind of trip up on a lot. Your proteins are made by your genes. So your genes code for or create your proteins. Your proteins are not a part of your genes, right? They are two totally different structures. Like look at this picture here. These proteins are not connected to the genes. Same here. There's an arrow pointing from to show that they're being created by the genes, but they're not a part of it. Proteins and genes are two totally different structures. So if you ever see anything that says proteins are on the genes or are part of the genes, not true. Your proteins are made by the genes. They are two separate structures. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is what happens when you change those ingredients within those genes. What happens when you change the protein that is being made? So we call a change in the genes that mutation. So mutations are changes, like it says, in the number, type, or order of the bases that make up a gene. So let me go back a little bit. Like right here, we see the gene, a small section of DNA, right? We got that part down. So inside each gene is a certain order of these base pairs. So maybe you have an A with a T, and then a G with a C, and then another A with a T. So the order of those base pairs is like the ingredients within the recipe. So if you change any ingredient, you're going to change the protein, right? So that change is what we call a mutation. So of course, if you change the protein that's being made, it can result in the trait that the protein is responsible for to be changed as well. Let me say that again. If you change the protein because of the mutation, the trait may also change. So if you have a mutation on your gene that makes eye color, your eyes who would originally be brown, let's say, if you get a mutation, they can then be green because your protein changed. Now, one thing that's super important that I think this is one key thing that we've kind of not really been hitting so far this year. Mutations are always going to be totally random, okay? So we can't really predict when they happen. They just happen. They just change. Kind of scary, but it's the truth. So we can't really predict when a mutation is going to happen. They just happen at random. Now, this part we've definitely been hammering down all year. There are 3 different types of mutations depending on how they help an organism survive or not survive. So if we see a beneficial mutation, that means that is a good change. That means that that trait is changed for the better. So that trait change is going to help that organism survive. So this is a mutation that is good to have. Now, on the other hand, you can have a harmful mutation, which is a bad change. You don't want a harmful mutation. If you have a harmful mutation, the chances of survival are going down. They're going to harm the organism. And on the other hand, you can have one that is neutral. A neutral mutation doesn't hurt, doesn't help. It's just kind of there. Maybe you don't even see the trait change at all, or maybe it's just something that doesn't really matter that's changed. So last thing that's going to help us see another cheat sheet, just really help us pick out, okay, how do I know if this question is talking about a mutation that's beneficial or harmful or neutral? So here are some key words and phrases that when you see them, a little alarms should be going off in your brain, okay? Because they are hinting at either beneficial, neutral, or harmful. So whenever we're talking about a beneficial mutation, so something that's super good or positive, when you see words like helping the organism survive or provides protection against, or immune, meaning you cannot get some type of disease or something. When you see these are all positive words. So when you see a mutation described in this way, you know they're talking about a beneficial mutation. On the other hand, I'm going to go over to harmful. When you see these negative words like leads to disease or increases the risk of, you don't want to be at risk of something, or cancerous, obviously not good, pain, disorder is like another word for disease or sickness, or health issues, these are not good. So we know we're talking about a harmful mutation. Then lastly, neutral. If you see it does not change an organism's ability to, or there's no change, or there's no effect, it's neutral. It's not beneficial or